Hey guys, welcome back to Pokemon TCG Pocket. In today's video, we are going to be checking out the results of Ursi Day's weekly tournament. This is the biggest tournament that we see in the community. This one was 1,500 plus players, and we got some crazy results for the first week of representation with the Mythical Island cards. And massive shout out to Ursi for doing this, and I absolutely love these tournaments. I will leave a link to all her stuff in the description. Go ahead and show us some support because this is absolutely fantastic stuff, and I love looking at these reports. But we have a Golem deck coming out with the wind and just a complete shift in the meta that I want to go through. So let's get into it. Okay, so here we are taking a look at the standings. Now we're going to dive into these decks in a minute. I just want to look at the meta game and the way things shaped out because it was crazy. So we have Nino Leo, a massive win using a Golem Druddigon deck with the Tech Hitmonlee. Absolutely fantastic. Now, one note about this one, I believe that they did not face a single Celebii. So that is one thing to keep in mind. This deck did not end up coming up against a Celebii at all through its time, which is very clutch when you are running a deck weak against that, especially when we look at the representation of Celebii. But this is the very interesting thing with the Celebii Superior deck. Now, obviously, next week this could change. We are still evolving and finding the meta. But if we take a look at the metagame, you can see we had 24%, almost 25% Mewtwo decks. And then we had 10.73% of the decks were the Celebii with Superior decks. Now, the interesting thing is when we look at the top 32 cut, which Ursi posted over on her Twitter, we only have 12.5% of that top 32 being Mewtwo EX, and there is not a single Celebii in there. Now, do I think in future tournaments Celebii will creep in there? 100%. I think it will. But it may just be that even though we had so many Celebii decks, maybe the flips are just too inconsistent for a tournament settings where you need to continually win against other really strong deck and strong players. So that is the super interesting thing to me. But once again, Celebii not even making the top 32 when it had a 10% representation. That is a lot being played over in there to not be represented. Now, the other thing is we had the next one in representation at 8.57 being the Scolipede Wheezing, and I think that was anticipating a lot of Mewtwo's, but then also getting hit hard by some of the other decks. But when we look at that, it was also not represented in the top 32. So a very interesting shakeout from what was entered into the tournament to what actually ended up in the top 32, with Gyarados EX being the absolute shining star in the early rounds. The 40% of the finals being the Gyarados EX, when we only had about a 8%, that is a big increase. Now, keep in mind, we do have another 1% here with the Starmies. We've got another 0.85 with the Vaporeon as well. So, you're looking at about 10% representation from Gyarados, but getting a 40% representation in the top 32. The deck is absolutely fantastic with the focusing around the Greninja. So that is the metagame that I wanted to look at. Now let's take a look at the standings. We'll first look at the first place Golem deck. Have a chat about that, and then we'll go through some of the other interesting decks and the meta changes along the way. So let's jump in and take a look at this deck, which is really a fun deck. Now, the core of this deck is going to be the Golem line and the Druddigon. The massive thing that happened, in my opinion, for the new set was the Graveler. The Graveler and Leaf are the two things, and obviously the Golem themselves, but like the Golem is obviously huge. The being able to defend damage as opposed to take extra damage, I do really like this effect. You do have a trade-off with damage amounts, but I think the Golem is fantastic. But the other big things are the Leaf and the Graveler. The Graveler making you able to do linear plays, kind of like you do with a Machamp, is absolutely fantastic, where you've got 20 damage into 40 damage into 120 damage. It is just big pressure that you can apply. And the Druddigon, and in this deck, you're not running any of the fire or water energies. Druddigon is just there as a wall. And in a deck where you have only single point cards, and if they want to get through your wall, it is incredibly tanky wall. And then your big hitter is also incredibly tanky because that guard press doing 120 damage, but then also reducing the damage by 30 the next turn. It is so hard to punch through three of these cards with any other deck without putting yourself in KO range of that Golem with the 120 damage. Then we also have Hitmonlee, which we saw in the final. Hitmonlee coming in super clutch because all you need to do is make sure everything gets in KO range of Golem. And Hitmonlee, putting it up there early to chip some damage on the bench to get them into KO range for the Golem is fantastic. And then the other thing is, if they attack into Druddigon, it's also getting things into KO range for the Golem. And then we have the one tech Marshadow in here, which is really good, especially if you're leading off with that Hitmonlee to weaken a bench. They knock it out. You can come in with the Marshadow, maybe revenge for a kill, and get the game. Now, the other thing to note is that we do have, shared weaknesses in this one, or split weaknesses, because Golem weak to the grass. Then we got Druddigon with no weakness, which is fantastic. Then we got two psychic weaknesses. So we do have the spread weaknesses, so you're not just singled out by one specific deck. But like I said, this one did not come up against any Celebii EX decks, which may have been a harder matchup for it. And you could always lose a game like that to the Celebii EX decks. But then we're running 2 Brocks. Obviously, get that Golem online. You really want to get that Golem going as fast as you can. 2 Leafs. Leaf is just a massive card for so many decks, reducing that retreat cost, making you able to just not have to put any energy on the Druddigon, get it out of there if you're all set up with your Golem, and come in and start swinging. 2 Professor's Research for obvious reasons. The Giovanni is really important when you've got 120 damage. Yes, you do have ways to weaken the back row, but I feel like in this deck, a lot of times that 1 Giovanni could come in super handy. Then 2 Pokeball and 1 Potion. Potion very potent in this deck, with Druddigon being 100 HP wall against basics and stuff like that. Can really be annoying with a Potion on that. Same with Golem, because of its damage mitigation and incredible bulk. The Potion can be clutch. One thing I will note is you've got no Sabrinas in here. This is a very full deck, and you could definitely tech it around, but I thought this was an absolutely amazing deck, and it played super, super well. And it is a really fun deck, and Golem is like one of my up there favorite Pokemon, so I am glad to see this absolutely cooking. So that is the Golem deck. Once again, that was very impressive. Now, if we jump in here and take a look at second place was actually running just the raw Arcanine with Mew EX, foregoing the Charizard. Now, this is a great matchup when you consider the idea of a lot of Celebies running around. You don't really need the Charizard with Celebi. You just need to get that Arcanine EX so you can kill their first one quick, then they don't have the energy pressure, and away you go. So I do really like this deck. And then you have Mew EX for what would be considered its counters, which would be like, the Charizard or the Mewtwo EX and stuff like that. However, when you look at it this in the finals against the Golem, against the Golem deck, that's when you really want the Charizard in the fire deck to be able to just swing through and not care about it. Whereas this one, the Arcanine just didn't have the pressure in the finals to get it through. But besides that random Golem deck, like, this has a pretty good matchup across the board. It's a little bit rough against the Gyaradoses, but I mean, to push into the top 2, into the finals with this deck, with so many Gyarados making the top 32, was absolutely fantastic. Now, I do kind of want to check out what his pairings were like for mana. Let's take a look at what he ended up playing against. You can see we did get a win against a Gyarados, a win against another Gyarados, and okay, so no Gyarados before the top 32, so that was a pretty good pairing as well. But beating 2 Gyarados decks in the top 32 is nothing to shy away from for that one, which is really, really solid. Moving on to other decks, let's check the tech in the Pikachu Raichu deck. Let's see the change. This one was running the new Pikachu. Obviously, we've got the Electabuzz in there as well, and the one Zapdos, where I mean, it's not too bad. Being able to deal 40 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon, this can help you snipe the bench, as opposed to where most people run the Zebra Striker. I do actually like this kind of build. And then we run the one Dedenne. Dedenne is just such an absolute nightmare to deal with if you just keep getting the heads. This thing can be an absolute game winner for the 1 point and 1 energy. Plus, it's only got the 1 retreat, so you can pivot out of it really easy. Really solid deck. I do like this build. I like the new Pikachu more than the base Pikachu. Like, if you come up against a Staryu or something and you go second, you get 3 on the bench, you can just KO that Staryu. Really, really nice. And like I said, I do like the Electabuzz tech in this one, as opposed to having to run the Zebra Striker line, because now we get the Pikachu and Raichu, which allows us to punch hard, and then there's the Electabuzz to fill that role of sniping the back row when they go back. And a lot of things do have 40 HP, so you can actually get some clutch KOs with the Electabuzz in there as well. The one downside being that it does cost 2 energy, but honestly, really nice looking Pika deck as well for the evolution of the Pika deck. Moving on past that, the big one that we need to look at is going to be the Gyarados deck. Now, there will be a few different variations of this one, but this one is definitely storming in. And what we are seeing to consolidate as the quote-unquote best Gyarados EX deck in the meta at the moment is going to be the Gyarados with the Greninja line and the Druddigon as the stall. You have so much outside, like passive pressure outside of having to attack with this deck, that you can just the rough skin, that Druddigon is just an amazing card to wall for anything. But then you can build up a Greninja and you can start chipping for damage as well from the back. You got the Froakie Frogadier line, which makes going first not the end of the world. And then all you need to do is set up that Gyarados, because Gyarados is just so bulky at 180 HP and the 140 damage. Its number spread is fantastic. The one thing to note is in this deck, you don't really need to run the Giovannis, because you have the Druddigon that can chip damage, you have the Greninja that can chip damage, and in other Gyarados DX decks, you kind of want to hit that 150 threshold with the Giovanni, but with this, it's just so clean in being able to get that extra damage that you can just chip it out. Then for the supporters, it's very, very basic in this one. 2 Leafs, obviously for the retreat of the Druddigon to get it out. Maybe sometimes you'll try and get Gyarados out in pinch, but it doesn't matter. Leaf is literally there just to get your Druddigon out once you are set up and ready to go. Research, obviously for draw power. Misty, obviously for energies. And then Pokeball to get your basics. It is a very simple deck, but very powerful. And like I said, that Druddigon wall is just working so well in so many decks, as we saw it in the Golem deck as well. So this is what is coming up to be the top represented deck over in the top 32, which is going really, really solid. Now, was there anything else spicy? We did have a few other things. Once again, Pika getting a pretty good representation. Mewtwo getting a lot of representation as well. The one other thing I saw here, which I thought was super interesting, was this one, which was the Butterfree Gyarados deck hitting into the top. So for this one, you've got the single line of the Butterfree, which is going to give you some extra healing for the Druddigon. If you start with the Caterpie, you can instantly search those evolutions that you're looking for. I thought this one was super, super interesting. This one is running the 1 blue as well to play around with damage numbers. I do think blue is one of those ones where the more you play it, the more you'll get a feeling for how often you need it in each deck. And it's the kind of card I like taking into all my decks as I play them. And then if I go like 10 games and I'm like, I never needed a blue, then I just drop it out. I know it's not really in there, but in certain situations, I do think the blue is going to be a pretty big card to play, but it can either win you a game or it's a dead card in hand, and that's pretty much the way you look at it. And often, it's kind of like the reverse of the potion, where it stops you from the one-hit kills and stuff like that as well. So that it stops you from getting killed from full HP, which a potion can't. So that's the thing that the blue is really clutch on. Running a lot of supporters in this one, though, with the 8 supporters. So it is very, very heavy on the supporter roster. But nonetheless, as I said, this one, you do have the Druddigon, but they are still running that 1 Giovanni to get the 150 damage out of the Gyarados in a pinch. And then we do have really good sustain if we do manage to get that Butterfree out. So that was another very interesting deck. But that rounds up the tournament. Like I said, a massive congrats to the winners. Also, massive thanks to Ursi for sponsoring this. Like I said, she does amazing stuff for the community, and also to Spraggles. Spraggles was helping her co-host the top 32. Spraggles, another absolute legend in the community. So massive shout out to all those guys. Let me know what your favorite deck is out of these ones, and what's your favorite deck in the new set. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you have an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing the next one. Cheers.